You press the shutter button to focus. The professionals press this button instead. The process is called back button focusing, and if you're scratching your head as to whether this is just for the pros or if it's for amateur photographers like you and I, don't worry, I was in the same boat not too long ago. And the answer is probably everybody should be back button focusing, and it certainly helped me go from total trash to, well, slightly less trashy photos. But we've got to take baby steps, right? So let's break down why you should back button focus, how it can increase the chances of you getting the shot, why it's going to level up your level of creativity, and at the end of the video I've got a bonus tip that's going to dramatically increase the chances of you capturing amazing images of fast moving subjects. Okay, so what exactly is back button focusing? Well, it's pretty much what it sounds like. Instead of using the shutter button to focus, you know, that half press thing that we all do when we focus with the shutter button, instead we're going to use a button on the back of our camera to lock focus instead. So you're separating the steps of focusing and the steps of taking the shot, which has a bunch of different benefits. Now you might be thinking, why bother? My photos are fine as they are. Well, that's what I thought as well. So let's dive into why the big shots use back button focusing and why you should probably do it as well. First up, back button focusing puts you in the driver's seat when it comes to focusing in on your subject. It's especially handy when you're shooting something that could move around at any moment, like wildlife or a kid or my golden retriever, Walter. Let's say that you're trying to capture a bird perched on a branch. You know that it could fly away at any moment. Well, with traditional focusing, you'd have to point your camera at the bird, half press to focus, then while still holding the shutter halfway down and not getting cramp in your finger, you've got to recompose and then finish pressing the shutter down to take the shot. That is a lot of stuff going on, and it can often feel like trying to pat your head and rub your belly at the same time. It's doable, but it's a little bit awkward. And if you want to take another picture, well, you're back to square one, because to take that next photo, you got to start pressing down on the shutter button, which then forces the camera to try and refocus again. And only when it's got that focus can you take that second shot. However, with back button focusing, all you got to do is just aim at the bird and then tap that back focus button, and you're free to press the shutter whenever you like. The focus stays locked on the bird and you can snap away to your heart's content. It's like having a camera focusing assistant built into the camera, working away in the background, who remembers exactly where you want to focus, no matter how many times you press the shutter button or move the camera around. But this is where it gets really cool. Let's say that that bird suddenly decides to take flight and you want to capture the specific moment that it spreads its wings. Well, with traditional focusing, you're going to be scrambling because you've got to press that shutter button. Halfway through the press, it's going to start to refocus on the bird, and then the timing of the shot is completely out of your hands, because now it's down to how fast the camera can focus on the bird in that moment in time. And even the very best autofocus cameras, this can be quick, right? But it's still unpredictable. There's always going to be a delay before you can get that shot off, because you've got to go through the focus to get to the shutter being released. But with back button focus, just hold down that back button and your camera is going to track the bird like a heat-seeking missile. And then you can press the shutter button whenever you damn please, because it's decoupled from the focusing process, right? Which is pretty handy. Now, the next tip takes that separation of focusing and shooting to a whole new level. All right, moving on to the second reason why back button focusing is so powerful. Back button focus frees you up to concentrate on all of the other elements of photography that are required to take excellent photos. Let me explain. So have you ever been in a situation where you've got your focus perfect, but then you accidentally knock the shutter button and it focuses on something random in the scene? It's like half solving a Rubik's Cube only to have someone come and mix it up before you get to finish it off. It's frustrating, right? Well, with back button focus, once you've pressed the button and you've nailed your focus, it stays nailed. You can shoot, you can fire away on that shutter button to your heart's content without worrying about refocusing the shot. This is incredible for situations where your subject isn't moving, like the landscape photography that I do. You set your focus once and then you're free to shoot when the light changes, or you can concentrate on changing other camera settings when they need changing. You can focus and then forget. For example, let's say you're taking a series of portraits and your subject is stood at the same distance for all of them. Well, with back button focus, you can focus once at the start of the shoot and then just concentrate on capturing those killer expressions. No more missed moments because you're waiting for your camera to focus every time you press that damn shutter button. It's kind of similar to when you stick your camera on a tripod and you lock in your composition. Once the camera is in place and the composition is locked in, you don't have to worry about it anymore. And the same goes with back button focusing. Grab your focus and then you're free to concentrate on all of the other aspects of your shot. The composition, the lighting, capturing that perfect moment. It is truly liberating. And something else that can be liberating is eliminating the chance of missing the shot. Now, let's talk about pre-focusing. And this is where back button focus really starts to feel like a bit of a superpower. Picture this, you're at a racetrack, you're waiting for the cars to come zooming around the bend, and with traditional focusing, you'd be frantically trying to lock focus on the cars as they appear, probably missing the shot half of the time. It'd be like trying to catch a fly with chopsticks. Frustrating and probably unsuccessful. But with back button focus, you're going to be like a photography ninja. You can pre-focus using the back button on the track where you know the cars are going to be, and then just wait for the perfect moment to hit the shutter button when the car moves into position. No need to worry about focusing, you've already done that part of the shot. Sit back, relax, and when the car is in the frame, press the shutter button without the intermediate step of focusing to capture fast-moving objects like a pro. And this technique is an absolute game changer for all sorts of fast-moving subjects. Sports, street, wildlife, even your kid's football game. Anywhere where you can predict action is going to be, you can pre-focus right there, ready to capture the moment. It's like your camera can see into the future. You're not reacting to the action, you're already ready and waiting for it. And let me tell you, there is no better feeling than reviewing your shots and seeing that you've captured a perfectly focused image of a bird mid-dive or a golden retriever attacking a giant tennis ball. Now, it's not only fast-paced conditions that back button focusing can help. It can also assist when working with challenging light. All right, let's shine a light on our next point, dealing with tricky lighting conditions. Now, we've all been here, trying to shoot in low light, and your camera's autofocus is acting like it's had one too many drinks. It's sluggish, it's confused, and it can't seem to lock onto anything. This is incredibly frustrating, right? Well, back button focus is like giving your camera a pair of night vision goggles. And here is why. In low light, your camera's autofocus might struggle to lock on focus because there's very little contrast in the scene. And with traditional focusing, every time you press the shutter, your poor camera has got to start the focusing process over and over again. But with back button focus, once you've finally managed to get that focus locked on, you can keep it locked. No more hunting around in the dark every time that you want to take a shot. You can take multiple photos without the camera refocusing each time. This means that once you've got that initial shot locked in, you're far less likely to miss that next decisive moment. And this is super handy for things like concert photography, where the lighting can absolutely 10 times a second be all over the place. Or maybe you're out doing landscape and you're shooting the night sky. You can focus on a bright star using the back button, and then you can recompose your shot without losing that hard-won focus. It's like your camera having a focus memory. Once it's got the focus locked in, you don't lose it. Which leads us on to the next situation, which we might be using when our autofocus gives up altogether. Now, let's talk about something that I actually use quite a lot in landscape photography, and it used to drive me absolutely nuts. This is switching between autofocus and manual focus. Now, because when you're using traditional focusing, your camera is going to try and focus when you press down on the shutter button, you have to toggle a physical button on your camera to enable manual focus. Or even worse, you've got to find the manual focus settings in your camera menu and then turn it on and off when required. And this is not only a massive pain when you want to switch to manual focus, but what I tend to do is forget that it's in manual and then spend 5 minutes faffing around when I move to the next location 20 minutes later, and I'm trying to get the camera to focus using autofocus, and I forgot that I put it in manual mode. But with back button focus, switching between autofocus and manual focus is smoother than a freshly waxed surfboard. You can set up most modern cameras, so it's basically manual focus mode via the front focal ring on the camera's lens, whilst also having access to autofocus via the back focus button, which is awesome. You get the best of both focusing styles enabled at the same time without having to switch settings or turn switches on the side of your camera. This is incredibly useful in all kinds of situations. Let's say that you're shooting macro photography. You know, those super close-up shots of typically tiny things. Autofocus can sometimes struggle with macro shots, hunting back and forth like a lost puppy. But with back button focus and manual focus essentially enabled at the same time, you can get close with the autofocus and then fine tune manually without having to flip any switches on the side of your lens or on the side of your camera. Or how about when you're shooting through obstacles? If you've ever tried to photograph through a fence, you'll know what I mean. When you've got back button focus and manual focus enabled at the same time, you can manually focus past the fence and then use autofocus to nail the focus on your actual subject. It's like having X-ray vision for your camera. And this is also great for those times where your autofocus just isn't cutting it. Maybe you're shooting a misty landscape and your camera keeps trying to focus on the mist rather than the trees or the mountains in the middle of it. No problem, rather than pressing the back focus button, instead you're free to focus manually. But the moment that you need autofocus again, it's right there at the press of a button without having to mess around with camera settings or remember what focus mode your camera was set up in the first place. This seamless switching is like having the best of both worlds. You've got the speed and the accuracy of autofocus, and you've also got the precise control of manual focus when sometimes that might be the superior solution. Now, remember at the top of the video where I promised you a game-changing bonus tip? Well, here it is. Back button focus really shines when taking shots of rapidly moving subjects. So you might know how it feels when you're trying to take photos of your kid's football game or a bird in flight and your camera's focus is just seemingly always one step behind. It can be like trying to catch a greased pig, frustrating and sometimes unsuccessful. But with back button focus, you become the master of motion. And here is why. Most cameras have a continuous focus mode called AI Servo on Canon or AFC on Nikon and Sony. And this mode is great for tracking moving subjects, but it can be a right pain to use when you're using the regular shutter button focusing method. With traditional focusing, you've got to constantly half press the shutter to track the subject and then press it all the way down to capture the moment that you want to take the photo of. And this might be fine when you're nice and chilled and your hands are warm. But if you're outside, your hands are cold, you've got a little bit less dexterity in your fingers, and perhaps you're even panicking because the adrenaline is pumping and maybe this is an important moment that you're trying to capture. Well, in these situations, everything falls apart pretty quickly. However, with back button focus, when you want to track a moving subject, you just hold down the back button and that's it. Done. The camera is going to keep focusing as long as you hold that button. It's going to follow your subject like a bloodhound on a scent trail. And the best part, you just snap photos whenever you like by pressing down on that shutter button. No worries. And if the subject stops moving, no problem. Just release the back button and your focus is going to stay locked where it is. This can be an absolute game changer for all kinds of sport photography, wildlife photography, or even just trying to capture your hyperactive pet as they fly around the garden. Back button focus is going to give you the edge that you need to capture those split-second moments. And if you would like to continue improving your photography results, why not click the video that's on the screen right now? It's all about mastering your camera's ISO, and it's a great complement to the focusing techniques that we've covered in this video.